Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the March 13th Environmental Matters Committee meeting. And we'll do roll call. Alderman Arnett. Here. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Present.
All right, thank you all. Is there so as far as the agenda, we do need to modify it to remove, ID 3325 and ID 4025, or postpone them, I would say, until the next meeting, because both of the departments just wanted some more time. Is anybody willing to make a motion? Oh, yes. Alderman.
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion, but I'm not seeing ID 30 or 35, whichever you said. I see ID 40. I see ID 21 and ID 40. Is there one that's not on my agenda?
It used to be on there, but apparently it's been removed in time. Okay. So now I guess we just need to postpone ID 4025.
Well, I'll make the motion that we approve the agenda with the deletion of ID 40.
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. And next up, we have approval of minutes from February 19th.
Move approval of the minutes for February 19.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. And next up, we have legislation R225, which is a demonstration program to build green roofs on city bus shelters. This is legislation from Alderman Gay. And Deputy City Manager, would you are you prepared to give a briefing on this for us? Overview?
Sure. So Alderman Gay, Jackie Gall, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability. So Alderman Gay's legislation proposes a pilot program for 1 year and to put green roofs on our installation of the green roofs, nor maintenance of the green roofs, or data collection on the green roofs. Some very preliminary research I found, that was that that it would cost about $5,000 for each green roof, but I think in this area it would cost a bit more. That those numbers were caveated with it depends on where you live, and we know that it's very expensive to do projects of that sort around here in this area. So I did suggest there should be a budget in the around $40,000 at least for this project, and then Department of Public Works would likely be the department that would be maintaining these roofs. There's some initial maintenance in the beginning, especially the first 6 months, to make sure that the plants are properly watered, that the system is not clogging, that you're getting out any weeds and you're replacing plants as needed. And then once the system gets more firmly established, there's not as much maintenance, but there will be fall and spring cleanup. There will be some maintenance ongoing with this project throughout the first year. It's a year-long project. And then also for data gathering, I did check in with the Department of Public Works on whether they have the equipment and the ability to gather data such as ambient air temperature decreases, stormwater decrease, water usage, and that sort of thing. And they agreed with me that it would make much more sense for an outside consultant to do that sort of work, that has the equipment to do the data monitoring, that knows what to monitor for, has the experience with it, and that from the data they gather, they could issue a report on the environmental benefits of the green roofs. So that again was not budgeted to hire such a consultant. It was not budgeted with the legislation. So I don't know what that figure would be. I have not researched how much that would cost. So there is, of course, there's the money that's associated with it. Transportation is working with procurement to identify 5 shelters that make the most sense based on their exposure to the sun, their visibility to the public, because they wanted this to be a public education project as well, where we could put signage on the bus shelters about what's going on the roofs, and where passerby would also notice it. And we have the ridership on the buses that would also take note of what was happening on the bus shelters. So Mr. Moore believes that he can readily identify 5 bus shelters that would work, and that we would have to have Public Works again look at these bus shelters to make sure there were no additional structural improvements that needed to be made in order to accommodate a green roof. I mean, whether the roof is strong enough, the supporting structure is strong enough, and whether they are structured in such a way that makes sense for drainage, or whether we need to make some improvements to them. So there's some work by staff as well that goes into this project.
Okay. Any questions from the committee members? Alderwoman Finlayson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions. I'm looking at the fiscal impact note, and clearly it is not complete because it doesn't speak to, I mean, it says $5,000 for the installation of the shelters only, but it doesn't, it's not inclusive of exactly what this is going to cost. And so I'm not clear on why this is before us without all the information. I think it's a great idea. I've observed them in other municipalities through LGAG, and they're doable. But we're not providing enough information here. 2 other questions. Ms. Giles, did you talk to Severn Savings Bank? That's no longer Severn Savings, Shore Bank. Because they've had the longest standing green roof that I know of in the city, that they installed shortly after that building was erected. So did you get any information from them about maintenance and all of that? Or did you talk to them?
No, I have not talked to Severn Savings Bank. We also have green roof. We have a green roof on the Public Works maintenance facility on Hudson Street, and we have one on Pitt Moyer as well. I think that one has not been maintained. That one is in need of improvement. So we can also get information from, now that it's been over a year, for the maintenance facility, how that green roof is holding up and what kind of maintenance is involved there.
And you mentioned speaking to other municipalities. I was just wondering about the locals that right here before us. I would think they would be our first go-to source for information, especially when they've had them at least at Shore Bank for many, many, many years. My other question is about the ownership of the bus shelters. Do we own all of the bus shelters? And is there, well, first of all, do we own all of the bus shelters?
I believe we do. I can verify that with Director Moore.
I think we did.
Well, I know that we lease them for advertising purposes.
Right.
Know what the restrictions might be when they lease them, whether there are any, and there may not be. But I just think that that's something that should be investigated going forward. But I think, you know, this is a worthwhile project. I'm not sure who's going to manage it. You know, I'm always concerned when several different departments are responsible, because then you get pointing fingers. But who has stepped up? You know, we always come up with great ideas, but who has stepped up to challenge this for us, to make sure it moves forward?
Right. And I have spoken with with the Department of Public Works, with Mr. Harold there, who would likely be the project manager for the project, and Public Works' maintenance crew would be the responsible department and crew to maintain these green roofs. They have, you know, some experience already with the Public Works building and in doing this.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you. I subscribe to all of the points that Alderwoman Finlayson made, but I think I have while I appreciate the thought, I really do have a question about whether the juice is worth the squeeze. I wonder how many square feet of bus shelter roof we have, and how much runoff it will actually control, but it does seem that green roofs throughout their history, unless there's been some really big technological strides, have had a spotty history. And I think that they do require a lot of intensive and persistence maintenance to keep them up. And I would almost think that there would be much bigger targets than the bus shelters to start with. So I do think this is a lot more expensive than 5,000. And then, if my suspicions are correct, a much bigger staff load if the goal is to ultimately put them on all of the shelters. But I do seem to remember that we don't own all the shelters. I thought there were other people that provided them. So I think there's a basic question of whether we even have the right to do this, or we may need to negotiate that for any of the shelters that we don't own, which I thought was the majority of them were not ours, but could be incorrect on that, or that could have changed without me knowing it. But I just wonder whether this time, particularly with the more general budget uncertainties that we're hearing more and more about, and I heard some more from the FAC meeting this morning, I just am not particularly enthused by this legislation at this time.
All right. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure where I am on this. I do really like the initiative, and I don't want to discourage such. Oh, Alderwoman, you have your hand up? Alderwoman Finlayson?
Okay, you're finished. No, you go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think it's good to look at some of these initiatives to see if they're feasible, but I do think I agree with I think both of the points you've both raised. So I don't know how much benefit we would get as far as direct stormwater management. The benefits to green roofs are the stormwater benefit, but also reducing urban heat island effect, right? But it is, these are very small roofs, so it's the benefit I do see. I think the larger benefit is probably public education, is that, and that, I guess being a demonstration for some of these, what a green roof is, what they can do, shows that we're looking to take steps to further sustainability initiatives in the city. But yeah, I think the cost hasn't really been too well defined. I guess at this point, should we ask for, I guess, Ms. Guile, if you could perhaps let the city manager know, I think it'd be good to have some consistency between the fiscal impact note and the staff report. I feel like they should maybe get with the sponsor to get this determined, because I think the original proposal was, well, the resolution doesn't state anything. Fiscal impact's 5,000. Staff report is in the tens of thousands, right? I'm not entirely sure. My other reaction was, I kind of, again, I don't want to discourage this, but on the other hand, I think some of these budget requests should probably wait for the budget if they can wait. I think we needed to push forward some of the leaf blower transition, because that had passed already. But with this, I think it might be good to wait, because we don't know what the other budget impacts might be from federal government. Alderwoman Finlayson, you can have the floor.
I was going to propose that we postpone action on this legislation and send it back to not only the sponsor, but to staff, because I feel our reports are all incomplete. The fiscal impact note does not accurately depict what it's going to cost. We don't have information about the square footage that will be impacted by these roofs. We don't know the locations and whether the locations would be in areas where it would truly be a beneficial educational opportunity. So there are a lot of things that, I would support this. I want to support it, but it makes me uncomfortable because we don't really know. I don't feel that the staffing impact report is accurate as far as who's really going to be doing this work and out of who's already full day will this responsibility come. And then if we have to hire an outside agency to do this for us, then what does that mean? So, I think we should not kill it. I think I would like for us to send it back to staff and get all the information we've mentioned today.
Second that.
Okay, so what I have, and one thing I'll suggest, and I know the Alderwoman had a good point about trying to reach out to the local. If we have any local jurisdictions that may have done this already in the States, I don't know. The only one I've seen is in Stockholm. So,
There are other city. I mean, I can check with other Maryland towns, but there's plenty of information when I was doing the initial research in other cities like Boston and
Okay.
New York where they've done green roofs on bus shelters.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the list I'm hearing from people, let me know if there's something I should add, is if we get some more information on square footage, also some refinement on location. So I guess that would be Public Works or Department of Transportation, I guess, to go out. Because some of them, I don't think, top of my head, I suspect the plastic ones, those beige plastic shelters probably aren't going to work. Because that is important, because if we don't have any that are what's the word, compatible, then that's going to raise the cost even more.
Exactly. Then you're buying a structure. You're replacing the bus shelter structures with a new structure that is compatible. And that will drive the cost up greatly.
So are you saying, is that something that you have to do if you put these green roofs, or
No,
can they
you
be
don't have
renovated?
to.
Okay.
If your roof can sustain the load and there's appropriate drainage, you may be able to do it, but there may be improvements you have to make to the structures. And that's
Yeah.
something that I asked Public Works to look at when they were looking at which, and with Department of Transportation, which bus shelters would be feasible to use. I asked them to look, because that was something would have to go into the fiscal impact note, was what additional costs would there be as far as structural improvements? And if we don't have any shelters that are appropriate, then how much would it cost to purchase ones that are appropriate?
Right. And I think another factor to look at for location would be the best educational effect.
Right.
I mean, having one in the middle of a sidewalk next to a forest is not really going to have a good impact compared
When I
to,
reached out to Director Moore, we talked about it makes sense for the routes that have heavy ridership,
yeah.
and then also where we think there's pedestrian traffic that would see the bus shelters as well.
'Cause I know
And of course, there's the environmental location. It has to receive enough sunlight. It can't be overshaded, et cetera, for the
True,
plants to
yeah.
grow.
Absolutely. All right. So then the third follow-up item would be if there could be some expansion on the educational component, because presumably we'd have to have some kind of what do they call it, display of some kind, right? Oh, he must have joined us.
Ownership, I think we need to investigate who owns these shelters and which ones are actually ours and which ones are someone else's to whom we need to get some agreement or permission.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so ownership on there. One thing I'd like to add is what pool of money we could utilize for this. I'm guessing I think we have some one-time use money left, because I think the administration used it for something recently. But I think that's we need to figure that out as well. But Finance Committee might have to get some answers to that. I think they're deliberating on this. Last thing I have on my list is some expansion, if we can get that on the maintenance that's expected on. Presumably they should be probably weeded every, I don't know, twice a year, maybe at least. I don't know off the top of my head. That'd be something good to know if we could get a hold of somebody in Boston or these other cities that have them. Alderman Gay, I see your hand. I'm gonna. Have you been listening, or do you want us to brief? Do you want me to brief you on what we've talked about thus far?
Yeah, I've been listening. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I've been listening and completely agree with pretty much everything you all laid out and that the deputy city manager has stated. And obviously, first, let me just thank her team for working on this because I just presented the idea. I thought it was great just based off of what we had seen in our travels, and particularly in communities, the low income communities that we did have an opportunity to visit. And I just thought it would be a great benefit to the city of Annapolis. The maintenance, I agree with you. That was a concern of mine because I know that we do have the city owned green roofs, and that's kind of slipped down to the bottom of the list. And so because these will be in public view a lot, I do want to make sure we either work with Public Works or Parks and Recs to figure that out, and particularly in the winter as well, and figuring out what happens with the spaces. And I couldn't agree more with location being in prime spots with high pedestrian ridership, and I'd also like them to focus at some of our low-income communities as well. Rockwood and Eastport, I know, have two bus stops directly in the community. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I see Alderman Arnett.
Yeah, I am having a problem which is much larger than this, which is metrics. I mean, what is the value of X number of feet of stormwater retained as opposed to running off? First of all, some of these bus stops, I think, kind of have dome-shaped roofs, and so I'm wondering how you even hold the sod on. Seems like there's going to be a problem there. But more importantly, just generically, and thinking about the metrics of stormwater saved and what does that convert into value. There's alternatives too, like maybe having solar panels on bus shelters, assuming you can make the connectivity, would have more economic value than having sod on the panel. So I thank Alderman Gay for the thought. I think it was creative, and certainly the staff for doing the work, but there may be alternatives uses that might be even more productive for the bus shelters, but it's not even clear to me how we value the return on investment. Is it just any stormwater runoff saved? And I assume because there's kind of a sponge effect on these rooftops, but how do you compare alternative uses in the metrics there?
Alderman Arnett, if I may, I just want to jump in about the solar panels. There is a project right now with Department of Transportation to put solar panels on some of the bus shelters. And they're going through the same exercise of determining which ones are appropriate structurally, shape-wise, and are located in areas that will receive enough sunlight.
Yeah, I see this. I think this is something that, I think we will end up utilizing a number of different technologies and improvements. So I think you'll see some shelters that we should put solar panels on that actually have access to connect right to the electrical grid, perhaps, or to power a nearby streetlight. And then I think we'll have some that are appropriate for green roofs like this. But there's a lot of different, and I think to your, I can't remember if you were saying this before we started or after, but I think before we started, but as far as the pollinator gardens, I recently saw a short film at the Chesapeake Bay Alliance. They had a film festival, and it was, I think, New York City. No, I forget what city, but anyway, they had a new technology of vertical. Oh, it was London. Vertical gardens, green walls, basically, and they have. Yeah, it hasn't really grown too well, but it's a little different than that, actually. It's more dense, but this is a design that they actually plant wildflowers, and they plan to have a network of pollinator walls throughout London to help support the butterflies and things. And so I could see this doubling as having a benefit in that regard as well. Planting some flowers. would be
There
nice.
are examples where they show not only solar panels on the roof, solar panels combined with green roofs, just green roofs, and then the side vertical walls of plants as well on bus shelters.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I really
Yeah. Yes, Alderman.
thank you. I will email you, Alderman Arnett. The EPA has done a lot of research on this, and they have something that was released in August of last year, where they talked about the direct benefits in urban communities and historic communities, and how they've benefited from it, using examples from Maine, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and a few other places. And I'd be happy to share that with you as well. I will admit I don't believe that there is data readily available, and particularly from local jurisdictions, because I don't know if any others do this or even record it. I haven't found that, but I would pass that over to the staff.
They have, and I think you've seen the one, and I think there was one in Harlem, and there's one in Boston. I think you were aware of those two projects when we talked, where they did do data gathering, and one was.
Oh, I was thinking of local, like in Maryland. My
Oh,
apologies.
in Maryland, okay. Yeah, some of the data was gathered by drone, like the ambient air temperatures were in the nearby buildings as opposed to right around bus shelter. And then they did, I think they had some kind of technology attached to monitor how much stormwater capture there was and pollution reduction through filtering. And then there, as the benefits you're alluding to about pollinators and migrating species, there's its habitat as well. And there's an
Yeah.
education component.
Well, so Alderman Gay, please get that to us soon before the EPA is destroyed and they remove that information. But the other
And
comment,
transportation.
yeah. So the other comment, as we're talking about this, I think an appropriate place for this would be probably area like Parole, where it doesn't have as much green space, doesn't have as many trees as other parts of our city, and so that would be a good place as far as creating a pollinator network to have these green roofs.
Director Moore was looking at sites this past week for both the solar and the green roofs. He didn't have the information ready for me for today, but they're actively working on identifying appropriate bus shelters, because again, you have to go to the structure of it. Some are dome shaped,
Yeah.
others are not. And I'll find out from him. I'll confirm if we own all of them or which ones we do own, and if there are any restrictions. If he's
Yeah.
thought about that yet, I'm sure he has thought about when he's picking them out whether or not there's any restrictions on their use.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And thank you again. Alderman Gay, is your hand up again?
No, apologies.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for this initiative. I think it's good. And is there a motion
Thinking
to
out of the box.
postpone?
Yes, Alderwoman Finlayson made it, and I seconded it.
Oh, we did. Okay. Well, all right. All those in favor of postponing, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. And next item on the agenda.
May I speak
Yeah.
to the agenda?
Yes.
Once again, we don't have planning and zoning here, and we don't have that update. And I'm getting lots of questions about the status of the Eastport Shopping Center, about Crystal Spring, whatever, Providence Point, and other projects. There's a project going on in my ward that isn't even on the list, which is conversion of the old bank building at the intersection of Chesapeake and Bay Ridge. But getting that monthly update from Public Works, and I thought Mr. Meekins did a reasonably good job when he was here the last time, not here today, but there were a lot of things we asked him about that he clearly didn't have an update for us on. But that is, I think, an important thing to be on our agenda every month and get an update on it.
Do you concur, Alderwoman Finlayson?
I do, and I think we've had the same discussion in the Finance Committee. trying to get the directors to share with us the status of projects. So absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was my mistake. I asked for him to come back in April. I don't entirely remember why I did, but I will ask Ms. Jackson here to add it to the agenda for every meeting.
And what is also helpful is to get those reports in advance. I do read them. You'll see they're all marked up, and it's helpful to be able to think about it in preparing for the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
May I add-
Yes,
Mr.
Alderman?
In the planning department. So isn't he in planning and zoning? So do we want planning and zoning or do we want public works? Or both?
Well, planning and zoning for
think
sure.
I think generally, Mr. Meekins, and if there's a project that is specific for public works, then we can ask someone from that department to attend. That's typically, I think, how we've handled it. So if there's I guess Ms. Jackson, if you could see if Planning and Zoning could send us the report, I'd say at least a week ahead of time, and then we can let them know if there's a specific project that we want or that we need Public Works to come and speak to.
Or even
That works.
just attach it to the agenda for the meeting, because that's where I printed off.
Mhm.
Actually, you sent it to us separately.
Well, I want to make sure we have enough time to
Yeah.
get Public Works scheduled if we do
Right.
need them here.
I send that to Ms. Jackson, but I also send it individually to the members of the committee.
Yeah.
So it does go to Ms. Jackson. It would help. I have many times reminded Planning and Zoning that their report is part of this committee meeting, but it would help tremendously if they did submit a week ahead so you could determine as a committee if you want them to appear before the committee. And if that went through the clerk's office, that would be very helpful.
Okay. All right. And so next up on the agenda last thing on the agenda is resilience sustainability update. Ms. Child.
All right, I'm going to lead off with something that we haven't talked about a lot in this committee, which is the house barge task force. Because there's an environmental component to it. There's the environmental considerations that go along with that this committee identified with house barges. And I did identify environmental stakeholder groups for the waterways that are involved. And one confirmed that he would participate. I submitted the entire list to the mayor several weeks ago. They were working on adding people to that list. And what I need from the mayor's office is confirmation that the people who they have identified are ready and able to serve on that task force, so that this task force list can go to council for approval. Because it's the mayor's list, but the city council has to approve it. So I reminded the chief of staff again today that we need to get this ready for the meeting on the 24th of March. Because we have a first report from the task force due in mid-April and the final report due in mid-July. I went ahead and had staff meet over a month ago, several weeks ago at least, that are involved with procuring some of the information identified in the legislation that created this task force. And so we've already started doing research and gathering that information that we can provide to the task force members once they are confirmed. So that's where that stands right now. So hopefully we'll have a firm list from the mayor by the end of this week that I can follow up on and make sure that everyone on that list can go before council for confirmation.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you. I had a conversation with Jared Littman earlier today. One of the things that I think I'm curious about, and he is now also, is gray water and the impacts of gray water. And I think that's one of the things that I really don't even know how to start to look at that. But if we're going to have a big increase in people living aboard That's daily increase in sink water, shower water, possibly even the more fancy, even catamarans and other boats have washer dryers and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see what we can find out about gray water.
Gray water is one of the issues identified for the task force to address.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Well, hopefully, we'll have that for March 24th. Are there any other questions on this?
On the report?
No, I'm just
Oh.
this topic.
On house barges. Okay. Then one other one I wanted to update you on was the electric ferry. The electric ferry selection committee came down to our final firm for the design build of the ferries, and right as we were getting ready to put out our notice of intent to award and have it go through MTA's approval, so we could announce, we had a freeze on funds. So a pause on funds. So I'm in the process of finding out from FTA, it's been a little bit now, it's been since the end of February that they had paused our funding, what we can go forward with. Our federal lobbyists that we met with earlier this week believe that pause is really can only be in effect for 30 days to review a federal program, and that'll have to be lifted after those 30 days, which would be at the end of March. Meanwhile, I do have to have the notice of intent to award approved by the Maryland Transit Administration. So we're going forward with that so that when this pause is lifted, we can put out the notice of intent to award publicly and to notify the successful bidder. And also, meanwhile, we can have the RFP for the landing sites go through the review and approval process by MTA. That's also required before we can put out the RFP. So that is moving forward. I'm moving it as much as possible as I can during this federal pause and reexamination period.
Is this RFP for, what exactly is it for again?
The
Designing
landing site improvements. So on Fifth
the
Street,
landing site.
yes. So we have had in Public Works with their own funds as a CIP project went ahead and did an assessment and some initial design and of the landing site at Fifth Street and what would need to be done there to help develop an RFP. So then we put together an RFP that has to go through review and approval by the Maryland Transit Administration before we can put it out for advertising. So we're going ahead with that process. That can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. So we've already started that. And hopefully by the time we get that approval, and we'll also get the approval on our notice of intent to award, this pause will be lifted and we can move forward.
What about the boat design?
That's what we're ready for the notice of intent to award on the boat design.
So it includes the landing and the.
No, that's separate.
Okay.
Two separate things. We already did the RFP for the boat design. We did all the evaluation over the winter. We have selected the successful bidder. They do not know who they are yet. We have not notified them nor announced it because we can't until we put our notice of intent to award through MTA. They have to review and approve before we can announce. But the RFP for improvements at the landing sites can go out once MTA reviews and approves.
Okay.
So I'm moving both of those processes along with MTA. So I'm prepared as soon as the pause is lifted to go forward with the work on the landing site. I'm selecting a vendor for the landing site improvements, and we can issue our notice of intent to award for the design build of the ferries.
Okay.
There's Marcus.
Alderman Arnett.
There are 2 landing sites, and Fifth Street was all torn up when we were doing the water and gas lines and also the work for the fuel tanks at Annapolis City Marina.
Mhm.
And the street there has, according to a frequent complaint from a constituent, not been returned to a final surface. And I think the story is that they're waiting until we do the Fifth Street landing site. Is that?
Yeah, there will be quite a bit of construction there. That is as you know, that site floods. The bulkhead is failing. It's flooding already. So there's going to have to be some changes in elevation there and improvements on both the sidewalk and on the street. So this will all get done together. And hopefully this will start moving very soon and, be done this year.
Okay.
And as you said, the other landing site is on the city dock side, and we don't need to make improvements to the dock in order to have a landing site there. And anything that we do there will be part of the city dock project.
Thank you.
But what about operation of the ferry? Once it's built, the landing's done, are we going to have to presumably put that out for some kind of RFP unless the
Yes,
city's
that
gonna
is another
operate
RFP. So
Unless
the
Mr.
operator.
Director Moore here is going to have a ferry operator maybe.
Yes, that'll be part of our transit, so it will fall under Department of Transportation, but that is a separate RFP that we'll put out for the operator. We were getting ready to start putting together that RFP, then the pause happened. So we're just trying to get a little bit clarification
Mhm.
and on where we are with federal funding.
Okay.
Yeah, on that. Okay. The pollinator garden is moving ahead. Alderman Arnett will be pleased to learn. We have a draft design from Larry Weiner Landscape Associates. We are planning to have them make a presentation virtually to this committee at your next meeting in April.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And so before we go to final design on that project, yes, if we include that on the next agenda. And then we should be able to move into implementation. So the contract we have with Larry Weiner Associates, the design group, is just for design and for developing a budget for the site, the areas that are identified as suitable for planting. So then we will have to do another contract, and we'll have to put it out for bid on, or we could do sole source. We'll see what works out with the actual implementation of the project.
Okay.
Any questions on Pollinator Park?
Nope.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So I also have been in discussions with the county on their electric ferry project. They're getting ready to develop their RFP, and they're planning to use Annapolis as one of their main landing site. This is their ferry would travel between Annapolis, Mattapique Landing on Kent Island, and up to Baltimore, with Annapolis as the hub. So we'll have to figure out how that integrates as well. And I just got done with a presentation by a larger ferry builder for the Chesapeake Bay Regional Ferry. So the group through the Visitor Center, the 5-county consortium that's working with the Visitor Center on the Chesapeake Bay Regional Ferry, is bringing in different boat builders for their ferry as an information gathering exercise to inform their RFP that they will develop later this year. And Annapolis was invited to participate in that because obviously we're on 3 of their routes as a landing site. And the harbor master has a lot of expertise that is very valuable to this group. And we've been through the exercise already. So I am participating on that group along with the harbor master's office in looking at some of these initial proposals for ferries for the regional ferry. So we're talking about 3 different ferry systems operating, Director Moore, out of Annapolis. The city ferry, the county ferry, and then the regional Chesapeake Bay ferry. So we will be a very busy harbor in the future. Not that we're not already. Let's see. Go on for the updates. Okay.
Oh,
Alderwoman
Alderwoman,
Finlayson
sorry.
has a question.
What's the location of the county and regional ferries? Are they
So-
going out the city dock area also?
Yes. So the Annapolis is one of the landing sites, and then they will travel up to Baltimore as a landing site, and then across to Kent Island. Mattapique Landing was a former ferry site. So their grant was for the purchase of 2 ferries and no landing improvements. So they had to use existing landing sites as part of their grant.
So my question is, are we creating a hub, all 3 in the same location, and are we sharing the cost? Or are they bearing the cost because they're using our harbor?
So the idea for the county, again, is they did not receive any funding for landing site improvements. They were to use existing landing sites. So there's no cost sharing there. And yes, they're using Annapolis as one of their landing sites. And so when speaking to the harbor master, we came up with, we had the first grant. So we were looking at where it made sense for our ferry to have its charging site and its landing site, docking site. But then we started talking more about where would these other ferries come in? Does it make sense to be at the same site? They probably should be on the same site. That's what we're thinking right now. It looks like the dock will not be changed at all as part of the city dock project. So we can look at what we have now and make a decision about it. And it's also, Alderwoman, it's going to depend on the size of these ferries, or how much draft they take up, how much water they need, where we can put them on our docks, size-wise and maneuverability-wise. So until we know exactly what the size of the county ferry is and Chesapeake Bay ferry is, we can't make a final decision about where they will come into our dock. But we're trying to put them all in the same location.
I thought you were referring to the regional when you said they didn't get any funding. So sorry.
Oh, no. So where the regional ferry is right now, they just did the technical feasibility study on routes and participating jurisdictions. That was the extent of that study. So now they're looking at potential design and size of ferries, what kinds of ferries. I mean, one that made a presentation was an electric or a hybrid diesel electric, and the one I saw today was a hydrogen powered ferry. So they're even looking at what source of power they're going to use, because they have not secured funding for this next phase yet of the actual build.
That just opens up more questions. But I'm right there, because
There's a lot of unknowns on the Chesapeake Bay ferry.
there is too much of the unknown on all three sides. But I will. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Arnett?
Thank you. But this does raise another issue that you and I are working on with the harbor master, which is mooring balls.
Right.
And, I'm not fond of moving the mooring balls along the Navy wall because of the frostbite races and a lot of the other dinghy races. But I'm assuming that we're going to have to coordinate the mooring balls with all the ferry traffic.
Yes, definitely. And most of the mooring balls, the transient mooring balls, are grant encumbered. So we cannot take them out without paying Department of Natural Resources back for them. We can move them with permission from DNR. And we also have to make sure that our navigation channels are not impacted.
Right.
And then there's the racing as well. That issue came up.
Yeah. That's why I'd like to see the moorings out by the shoal marker and around closer to the Eastport Yacht Club.
Yeah. It's pretty complicated where we can put all of these vessels and routes in the harbor because it's already very congested.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So the Anne Arundel County Watershed Restoration Grants that the city helps fund through the Chesapeake Bay Trust, the application deadline is at the end of this month. And the good news with that program is the city usually puts in about $300,000 out of the Watershed Restoration Fund. But since there was fee in lieu mitigation from the city dock project, there was additional funds generated from that went into the Watershed Restoration Fund, $500,000 to be exact. So the amount of money we're using to fund these stormwater retention projects and stream restoration projects on private land is now gone from $300,000 to $800,000 this year. So we'll be able to do a lot more this year with that project. And those determinations will be made in April and May. They usually make the announcement in the early May. So I have more to say about that. Maybe next month, but maybe in May. All right.
What page are you on?
Oh, I'm flipping around, but I'm on page 9 right now. And I was going to
Okay.
have.
I don't want to skip by the Eastport flood mitigation
Go ahead.
project.
Ask me about the Eastport mitigation study.
Well, I was kind of surprised to hear about this. I would have thought that the alderman might have been invited to this briefing, but can we get some update materials on where this is?
We should be able to. At the time that they had this meeting at Pip Moyer in December, this was a meeting that the Resilience Authority scheduled, and that's an excellent point. The alderman from that ward that's affected should have been contacted. So I'll make sure that I tell the Resilience Authority. They're working with Council Fire as their communications company. So I'll make sure the people at Council Fire know to invite City Council in general, because the AMRE project, the Annapolis Maritime Resilience Initiative, covers more than just Eastport.
So I have a parochial interest in Ward 8, but do we have indications of high water? How many other wards are going to be potentially impacted? I mean, I think the council should be interested in this generically, because if we let Ward 8 go underwater, which is one of the considerations, that puts a big hit on our property tax revenue.
Sure.
So you're going to get rid of users, but you're also going to get rid of some high value real estate. But I am curious, I don't know, does Ward 7, is it impacted by high water? It's on the other side of Back Creek from Ward 8.
Yeah, there are some impacts in Ward 7 as well. So the Annapolis Maritime Resilience Initiative, the AMRE, that project covers the Back Creek and Spa Creek water, both of them. Then the Eastport Flood Mitigation Project, which Department of Public Works is spearheading. That is just that's just
Right.
Eastport.
Okay.
Well, the other difference is the Eastport only deals with public property, so the street end.
Right.
But AMRI, that deals with private property primarily.
Right.
So that's
Right.
going to be dealing with houses.
That'll be
other
gray and
properties
green
that'll-
infrastructure both, and habitat
Right.
as well as
Yeah.
stormwater control, ecological restoration, and stream health, all of that. So this was back in December when this kicked off. What I was told at that time is there would be more information. These projects would be further developed in the early part of this year. So we could have Jasmine Wilding from Department of Public Works come to the next meeting, if you'd like her on the agenda, to do an update.
On which one? On the Eastport?
She can speak to both the Eastport Flood
Okay.
Mitigation Project and the AMRE project.
Okay.
If we get enough high water, we won't have to do any dredging at Hawkins Cove.
So, speaking of the green infrastructure, that other state resilience climate education, they just had a workshop yesterday on green infrastructure. I'm trying to find it. It's in here somewhere.
Well, if you know more about it, go ahead.
You're just referring to the workshop that they had yesterday regarding the trainings from EFC, the Environmental Finance Center.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what kind of green, give us some examples of the green infrastructure that
Mhm.
you talked about.
Yeah, they were just talking about the typical examples that you'll see, living shorelines and things of that sort. Sort of talking about the differences between gray infrastructure, green infrastructure, the maintenance regimes that might be required, the difference in permitting and things like that. The purpose of that workshop was just to
Pull the
train.
mic a little closer.
My apologies. I'm by the way, Dylan McConich, Environmental Programs Coordinator.
Thank you.
Yes, they were just trying to compare the pros and cons of different infrastructure solutions to climate change. The purpose of those trainings is to make sure that representatives, staff, and nonprofit organizations from the selected communities are up to speed to the sorts of consultations that we might receive from the technical assistance partners that will be coming down the line to help us solidify a comprehensive resilience plan. Some of the infrastructure solutions could apply to us. I have heard from people that they would like to see things like living shoreline at the new city dock project. I've had to inform some people that there are constraints when it comes to green infrastructure. You need certain slope, and it restricts access sometimes. So at Ego Alley, we wouldn't be able to have navigation if we were to do certain green infrastructure solutions like a living shoreline. But in terms of takeaways from that specific training that we had yesterday, I can say that it was very useful, in my opinion, to our community partners to understand the process of things like that and where we could and where we shouldn't be installing alternatives to gray infrastructure. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry, too many meetings. I needed Dylan to jostle my memory on that. So that first session we had with it's called the Maryland Resilience Action Planning Project. It's run through the University of Maryland. And the first session they had was focused on the climate change basics, terminology, and data resources. And the second was on community engagement, particularly low-income communities. This last session, we focused on the nature-based solutions that Mr. Lakonich was referring to. And the next session will focus on budgeting and financing for resilience projects. The trainers will also start to schedule what they call ready for resilience assessments with each jurisdiction in April and May. And that's what I'm really looking forward to is, talking about specifically Annapolis, what our needs are, what our resilience plan maybe should look like. We need help with that. That's what we're really there for, is the technical assistance on developing our own resilience plan. So that's coming in April and May.
Good.
And so we'll have a one-on-one with one of their technical advisors with just the Annapolis group for that.
All right.
Okay.
And since Director Moore's here,
Yeah.
do you both want to provide an update on the electric buses for the committee?
Also, you could answer the question of whether the bus shelters are owned by the city.
Well, yeah. We can always wait till next meeting too. Fine.
I couldn't answer that question.
I feel like I was just here, but that was yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair and Environmental Matters Committee. Marcus Moore, Director of Transportation. To give you an update on the green roofs or our bus shelters. The ones that we have identified are the ones that we own. There's about 10 or 12 that will allow a green roof, or we were doing the same project to look at solar panels to put lighting in some shelters. So a view or evaluation, I should say, was done in the spring with our procurement officer and somebody from Public Works. So I have a list of those locations that could be used. As we move forward with the shelters, and your question was, do we own all of them? And we do not. Back in like 2010 or 2012, when we needed shelters, another organization called Creative Outdoor Advertisement came in to help us. And would like to move forward in years in the future, because we do have a good partnership with Vector Media of our percentage of non-fair revenue is advertising dollars, as much as 55%. That's what we get now for advertising on our buses and our bus shelters. So we can identify those that would be good candidate for a green roof. I'm not sure how many were being looked at, 3 or 5 of them yet. So I looked at our list and identified about 7 or 8 to choose from. So Dylan, Jackie, and I can go over them, and we can, see what makes sense and with your approval.
Yeah, that sounds good. We ended up postponing action on that to get some additional information. So yeah, we'd like to hear that next month.
Yeah, we just got that from our purchasing officer just this past Monday, so we can look at it again whenever you're ready. We can write it up with our recommendations there.
Great. Thank you. And electric buses?
Yes, thanks for asking. We're actually getting one wrapped as we speak. That will be done tomorrow. The second one will be wrapped next Tuesday, which is the 18th. And we're looking forward to having an unveiling or a press release, press conference 2 weeks from today at Pitt Moyer, Thursday, the 27th of March. Around 1 o'clock, we'll have unveiling, and then they'll be put into service the following Monday, the 31st. These are 30-foot buses. They have about 24 seats in them. Their range is 158 miles. Let's see. Curb weight is just a little less than what our normal Gillick is. Our Gillick bus is about 26,000 pounds. This one's about curb weight, 23,500. It says 158 miles is the operating range. And when we get our full charger installed, that'll be about 3.5 hours or so to go from almost E to full. One of the things as we are learning how this all works, it's not, you're going to get into a reserve when you get less than a quarter of your fueling, your power. and it'll start going into a slower mode, like almost like if you set your phone or anything else on a battery saving mode, you're going to lose certain components. So you definitely cannot go the 158 as a manufacturer suggested. But what we'll do is move them around all of our fixed routes, which will be the red, the green, the brown, and the state shuttle. We may do something with the magenta shuttle. The only problem is that's one of our routes that does have the tracker. So putting out there wouldn't have a tracker, but we would give more folks that get a chance to visiting our city to see how this operation works. So we're pretty excited. It's our first fully electric bus going into service, and 2 weeks from Monday we'll have it out in revenue service.
We're all going to take a ride.
I hope so.
Absolutely, you'll get a ride if you like on the 27th or before.
All right.
Thank you. Any other update from either one of you?
So I wanted to update you on how the gas powered leaf blower ban is going, because it is in
yeah.
effect. But we have the resolution that delayed enforcement. The resolution says till March 1st, but it was intended to be for 3 months, so it actually would be through March 31st. So we plan not to, we're just telling everyone we're not issuing citations until March 31st for enforcement purposes. We have been getting some complaints. So I think I said in my report we had about 5 complaints. But the last day we had a couple more. And residents upset about other residents using gas-powered leaf blowers or commercial users, landscaping companies, and then other people using them and not like to be informed by their neighbor that they can't use them anymore. So the landscapers their main complaint is that they're too expensive. We did get approval from the Resilience Authority Board to run a voucher program for the city. And Mr. Laconish followed up with them today to see where they were in establishing that program. And they had some more questions about how they're actually going to do it. So it's off to a slow start. As far as the voucher program was going, we had hoped we'd have it in place by the beginning of March. Hopefully we can have it in place before the end of March and have vouchers available to residents and to the lawn care and landscape businesses. But we're getting, the plastic bag ban was pretty smooth transition, probably mostly because the county had already had their plastic bag ban in effect for a year before we did, and we also were supplying a lot of bags to the public. So we really we've had like maybe 1 or 2 complaints on plastic bag ban, and we just things we could look into, largely to just educate the business owner about the ban. Sometimes it was not an English-speaking business owner, so the communication was a little bit more difficult. They didn't understand that the ban was in effect. But with the gas-powered leaf blower ban, we're getting more pushback.
Yeah, I think 2 of those complaints came from me. Because I was teleworking a lot with the county being shut down from basically because of the cyber attack. But I did notice 2 different landscape companies and I went out and just gave them a heads up and passed along information. But I think it'd be good, but it does kind of tell me that I think the enforcement program may need to get fleshed out a bit more as far as how is it going to be done. I know you were hoping to get an additional staff person to help with that. And that's not going to happen for a little while now, probably not for another few months. So one thing, possibly, you might want to have a conversation with Public Works. They have 2 environmental compliance inspectors. They have a slow period in the winter. They were using them to help with the sidewalk enforcement. I don't know if they'd have the capacity to do it to help with this now or not, but they're already out there doing inspections. They might be available. But I think my point is, I guess, we're going to be getting people coming to us as well, as far as with complaints. I'm just wondering what we should tell people. Should we tell them to continue to take a picture of the landscape company so that staff can get in touch with them about violations, because ultimately we want compliance.
I think the city needs to put out, again, another notice publicly about the fact that we'll start issuing citations, what those citations are to enforce at the end of March, and how to report. And we have that on the website, how to report. It goes to a email address, sustainability@annapolis.gov, which we can then look into what's happening. And right now we're doing education with people who, either residents or the commercial violators. Many people thought because we weren't enforcing through citation that the ban was not in effect. It is in effect. It's just that we're not issuing citations just yet. So I think we should do another public outreach, make an effort, and I think that we can handle it internally right now. Of course, it will be nice once we have a third person on board with working with Mr. Lakonich, myself. But I think we can handle it right now.
Mm-hmm. So when the city gets calls in the future, how do you think you're going to handle those procedurally?
When we get a call,
Yeah, if you get a complaint or a call, or if we get one and pass along to the city,
right?
how are you going to handle that procedurally?
What we'll do, what we're doing now is we follow up with the, if we know who there's a violator,
Yeah.
if someone sends us a picture and we know that's a particular company, we can follow up with them at that time.
Okay.
Now, if this is someone who we've already followed up with before, we have our discretion when we're going to issue a citation. Well, if they're just doing it in violation and they know they're doing a violation, then they'll get a citation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any questions about this
About that or the report?
program, or this particular leaf blower issue? Okay.
I do want to remark on the dialogue you and I have been passing back and forth about with the one provider. A question I asked is whatever happened to rakes, but also much to the chagrin of my next door neighbor, I leave the leaves on the lawn. It's good mulch and it provides, but also in the gardens, why would you want to blow all of that stuff away? But
Yeah.
in any event, I regret that person went to the same university that my father and grandfather went to, Cornell. But anyway, I do have other questions about the report.
Okay.
Okay.
So first of all, you satisfied your Doge requirement about what have you been doing. But I want to go back to the conservation easements only because in interviewing the new director nominee for the Office of Central Services, where do these easements reside? Who is tracking and keeping track of them? And would Office of Central Services be a good place for that to be tracked? Or, how are we managing these easements?
Well, particularly where the easements reside is effectively part of the issue. Where it should be, I would assume, would be the Office of Law. However, in terms of tracking where these are at, this list comes effectively from a section of the website which keeps track of the deeds, the plats, and essentially our city constructed maps reflecting those plats. This recovery is to go through the planning commission approvals and get the context for the easement, and then securing those deeds, understanding the extent of the survey that was described in the deed, and making sure that the plat agrees with the deed. Not all of these easements have all of those three different things going on. We would like to have our own internal copies backing up all of that information. And as long as the Office of Law is willing to kind of create their own archive, which I don't think would take much space, they should be appropriately housed there, just because, deeds and transfers and all those sorts of things are a legal issue. But yeah, that's a good question. And we're just trying to ensure that retroactive easements or easements in the past are properly documented, and that if they come up in the future, that we know how to resolve any issues, and future easements don't run into these issues in the future.
Yeah, it does seem like it's a valuable program that no one has really wanted to own or stay up to date on. So I do appreciate very much this update on the legislation, General Assembly
Oh,
legislation.
But before, on the conservation, I think
Oh.
easement, traditionally that's, I think, the planning and zoning, because they are created through the Forest Conservation Act, typically. And so the Conservancy Board has a role in inspecting and maintaining them.
So who in planning and zoning
But-
owns this?
Not all of the easements, some of them are conserva, some of the other types of easements we don't entirely know, as we've learned, haven't been properly recorded.
Yeah.
And so there's
So where we find the conservation easements, where you can see the deeds and the plats, is on the Conservancy Board's landing site.
yeah.
It's not in planning and zoning where you would think you would find it, where you should find it.
Mhm.
I could see it being in both places because that's what the Conservancy Board does. And this was always, has this been a long running issue with the Conservancy Board? When I started here in 2018, it was one of the one of the first questions I asked was, well, do we have all of our easements recorded? Do we have the deeds? Do we have the plats? And the answer was no. The Office of Law had intended to hire someone outside counsel to help them with that task, but did not do that. And so that's why because we are the liaison to the Conservancy Board, we just took it upon ourselves to let's just figure this out and provided the memo with the listing of what easements we knew about, which ones had question marks next to them, which ones we weren't sure were recorded, which ones we weren't sure what the boundaries were. And we provided that to the Office of Law with suggestions on how to proceed with that. So now they've assigned an attorney to that project with us and with planning and zoning. What's the name of the Macrone is the company that planning and zoning has used before to work on easements, and we're working with them to get the mapping done correctly. And the
Yeah.
planning and zoning is going to work with us on going through planning commission minutes, figure out if there was recommendations made with particular easements, so that we should know what we hold and what we don't hold, and what the parameters of those easements are, and that information should be publicly available. So we're trying to just avoid any other legal situations in the future and get this all worked out once and for all to the extent that we can.
Mhm.
Well, I think it's a good thing to do. And of course, we want to continue to encourage putting properties in conservancy. So keeping a record of who's in and who's out is an important thing.
But you're correct that it should be with planning and zoning. They should have that information correctly. So we should have on our landing page in planning and zoning, that's where these
Right.
things should live, not just on the Conservancy Board's landing page. And then the Office of Law is involved from the perspective of making sure that these things are recorded and they're correct.
Yeah, I may have frightened the new director of central services in suggesting he might get it, but we'll see. The bottle bill.
Yes.
First of all, I remember as a young boy growing up, collecting bottles and handing them back and being able to get enough bottles to buy a soda and candy or crackers out of the vending machine. So it's sort of retro legislation here. I think it's a good idea. But the one I wanted to focus on, because of the comp plan, is the solar photovoltaic cells. Seems like it's a good idea to require that. On the other hand, it's not going to square very well with affordable housing. I mean, that's like adding the cost of sprinklers.
Oh.
And now if you're adding the cost of solar panels,
Mhm.
that's going to add $50,000-$60,000 to a house.
Yeah, and I think some of that in that legislation, that's a concern with it, and who will pay for that, whether that's going to be state funded, if especially if it's going to be low to moderate income.
Yeah.
And I think there's some task forces and things like that identified to identify how the funds will be distributed and how they'll be used if that passes. One other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, if you didn't notice it, was that the Severn River Watershed Resilience Project that was submitted by the city and the county, the Resilience Authority did that on behalf of the city and the county. We'd identified about $43 million worth of projects there, and those are Gray and Great Infrastructure Projects, because it's DNR is a heavy hand in that funding, it has a big ecological uplift component to it. It was funded. So that the Severn River Watershed Restoration Project was the one we submitted. We were selected as one of the 5 jurisdictions that were funded, and this is state money. So it's not going to be paused or taken away from us. These are state funds. The city will receive at least $2 million, but we are in negotiations right now with the state on the level of funding, ultimate level of funding, and which of the many projects we put forward will actually be funded. So we expect much more than $2 million. I hesitate to come up with, speculate on a number, but it's going to be much more than $2 million in the end. And our proposal was selected as the predominantly suburban watershed project. There was an agricultural one that had to border another state, one that was mostly urban, the other category. But there was one that would be picked for predominantly suburban, and the Severn River Watershed Project was selected for that. Successful grant there.
On the 260 city-owned streetlights.
Yes.
An opportunity missed under the Panelides administration when BG&E was giving us the purple lights was for $10 a light more, you could actually have camera equipment with the light. Think about 260 more cameras
Yeah.
and what deterrence that might have, or helping to convert cases. So if we're going to make that investment, it seems like we might want to look at a more complete investment and
Yes.
get those cameras.
No, we can definitely consider other upgrades to those lights. I understand there's also equipment where you can slap on some solar cells and use just that energy itself for the light. I will say, as an update, we were notified today that we were awarded approximately $67,000 from the Maryland Energy Administration for that light replacement. So we'll continue to provide updates as we move forward with that grant. We have not yet accepted it. We just want to go over all the different agreements and those little details first.
All right. That's
Good reading. Thank you.
yeah. A lot of good work in there. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other hands, is there a motion to adjourn?
Mm-mm.
I'll motion to adjourn.
All right.
Nay.
Second. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.